Hey guys, want to try to do a quick video for once, but I don't know. Let's see how it goes. But I just want to compare these two watches. Not to find a winner, because it'll definitely be about preference, especially since there's so many differences. There are probably a lot more differences than there are similarities, but just thought it'd be fun because there are some similarities, and they're kind of like watches that kind of have camps to them too. Like a lot of people would be either a Speedmaster or a Daytona type of person, but I think a lot of people too would see that, like, if you're a true like sports chronograph lover, you might kind of need both. So but yeah, so these are not only dissimilar because of their nature, but they're also like very different types of examples. So there's no real like organization to this video, but I'll try my best to have some sense, rhyme and reason to it. But yeah, so basically, and I'll just quickly say here, like, the reason I do these videos is for people who are kind of want to know a little bit more about these watches from somebody who owns them, if you're looking for them, because I always love to see videos about watches that I'm interested in getting, and so that's kind of the reason I do these, just in case it's any use to anybody, and it's just for fun. So anyway, with that out of the way, I guess I'll start with the shorter list of what makes them similar, I guess. They're obviously both steel chronographs with kind of like a sporting history or design to them, and they came out, I won't say the exact dates. I know that Speedmaster was first launched in 1957 as a racing watch, hence the tachometer to measure speeds over distance, over a set distance, a known distance. So I'm sure all of you know how that works. And I think the Daytona was probably released. Well, there were pre-Daytonas as well. So anyway, it's a bit more murky, but anyway, I think it was originally launched as with the name Le Mans, and then they couldn't use that. They were like, I think they might have been sued or threatened with a lawsuit, because Le Mans was probably owned, the name was probably owned of the endurance race, and then obviously they started sponsoring the Daytona, the 24 hours of the Daytona, not the Daytona 500. I sometimes see people make reference to the Daytona 500 NASCAR thing, which I don't think Rolex would appreciate. I don't think they've ever sponsored that per se, but anyway, that's not really important. But yeah, so similarities, I mean, apart from being steel sports chronographs, there's not that much similar between them. I mean, they're both kind of like entry luxury products, at least originally, because like Rolex and Omega being kind of usable, they were never horlogerie, you'd say in French, I think. And they were, they're never supposed to be like fancy or anything, especially being made in steel and for, the purpose of motor racing, or the pretense of motor racing. So yeah, I mean, and they're very similar in size, actually. I'll do the size. The Speedmaster is larger in basically every dimension, but it's a lot closer than you might think, because they list the Speedmaster as a 42 millimeter, but it really isn't. That includes the crown guards, which is a part of the case, because they have an asymmetrical case. You can see the side of the case here is smaller on the left side than it is on the right side. So it's not a type of crown guard like the Daytona has, but it's just the case that flares out, which actually makes it asymmetrical, which is a bit eccentric, but that's just the way they've done it. I think it might have been actually NASA themselves that wanted a crown guard, just for so it wouldn't like just some protection against shearing off. But I think you could probably smash this pretty well, regardless. But the crown, I think the crown would almost be protected by the pushers anyway. But that's what they came up with. So, but really, the outside of the bezel is, as I measure it, about just over 39 and a half. Maybe it's the 39.7 millimeters that they give as the as the you know, the first Omega in space, or the older ones before the Lyre lugs that they made, I think right around, well, the late 60s for sure. Anyway, they came out with this case, and I think all the ones that went to the moon were this type of case, but they had the straighter, the kind of plainer lugs that without the crown guards that appeared on the original Speedmaster, and then the you know, the Ed Whites and that type of thing. So anyway, they list this as a 42, but it's really more like a 40 millimeter, or even a 39.5 or so if you measure the outside of the bezel, which is usually what I do to measure watch. And I know they're talking about the case, but really the presence on the wrist I always find is usually closest to the outside of the bezel. So, and if you can see that they list the Rolex as a 40, but there's no very easy way to measure the case itself in any kind of you know, diametric position. And so I measure the outside of the bezel too, and that is actually 38.5. So you might even call this like a 38.5 and this a 39.5 or so. So they're very close, but the Speedmaster, and this is the case that was in production for a long time. There's a slightly different case with a shorter lug to lug now, but this is basically the standard kind of moonwatch case that was used for decades, I think, without any major changes. So the lug to lug on this is 48, just right around 48 millimeters, and the lug to lug on the Daytona is 46.5, maybe a little bit more. So it's just under 47 millimeters lug to lug. The thickness on now this is a kind of a particular version that has a Hesalite crystal. So I think that might be a bit higher than the sapphire crystals they use. And this is the display back version, which I don't know how that affects the thickness, but yeah, so that I measured this at 13.6 millimeters in height, and the Daytona is right around just over 12, maybe 12.2, 12.3 millimeters thick. It also wears really well, even better than the, like, even more than the numbers would suggest, because it actually curves down quite a bit. Even though this looks like it curves down, it doesn't curve around the wrist. This actually sits pretty straight on the wrist and sits a bit high. So it definitely wears better. So yeah, they're similar size, but the Daytona definitely wears a lot better if you like kind of more elegant svelte watches, which I definitely do. Yeah, so what else could I say that they're very similar on? I don't think there's much. So again, I have a version, this is an older Speedmaster and a very new Daytona of its generation. So it's not the latest generation, but this is the last year of production on the 116520. I think it's a 2015, I think it is. So it's one of the last, I think they were made either until 2015 or 2016. So it's one of the last ones. So it has the newer type of clasp, and it has, you know, chromalite, it has the parachrome hairspring. Now maybe, anyway, I don't know which all the changes that were made, but chromalite and the newer clasp are one of the ways you can tell the newer Daytonas of the 116520s from the older. So, and this is from 1994, and it has a tritium dial, which is aged really nicely, which is why I got it. This version I got because I love the look of the Hesalite, but any moonwatch I always want a display back, because I think this movement is worth seeing. This is an 863 movement with the gilt finish, so it's quite nice. It's a little bit more decorated than I think even the 1863, but I'm not sure. But it's just got a cool look, and it wasn't, I don't think this Hesalite Sandwich, as they call it, was in production. It's pretty rare. It's a little bit harder to find, definitely, than a standard, like a, so this is a 395 2.50. So it's identical to a 3950, which was in production for a while, which was before the, gosh, what is it, 3750. which was in production for a long time too, until they came out with the big box and the long serial numbers. So yeah, so this is an older version, tritium and all that, so it's kind of like on that like almost vintage side of things, with the bracelet, which is I think it's the 1479 bracelet, which is very similar to the bracelet they've come out with on the new 3861 Omegas. So it's kind of got a lot of things that I like about it, because I do like this bracelet a lot more than the ones that came in, I think, in the late 90s or so, with the 3750s, and that went all the way until they replaced replaced it with the new 3861 movement ones. So it's got a cool bracelet. It is a hair puller, unfortunately, but nothing's perfect. And it's got, it doesn't have any real safety features, but it's definitely secure enough for any duty that I'm likely to ever put it through. So yeah, this is an older version, and it's just got, so if you compare it to a Daytona, it's just got a lot of more traditional features and just fewer features. So obviously it's a manual wind, and it's a lateral clutch, whereas the Daytona is a vertical clutch. So that pretty much means that the Speedmaster can kind of jump around when you start or stop it, because it has to mesh with gears, whereas the vertical clutch just instantly clutches, as it might suggest, and couples and decouples like instantly. And it's also this has a cam operated, as you can see. This won't be the best video of it, but you can see just the cam actuator right there to start and stop, whereas the Daytona has a column wheel actuation, so it just makes a much crisper feel, and so that doesn't make a big difference, but it's just one of those small things, kind of a haptic thing. So yeah, this is a manual wind, lateral clutch, cam actuated chronograph. It beats at a lower beat rate. I want to say, oh, I should know this, like I think it's like 21,600 vibrations per hour. I'm pretty sure. And then the Daytona is kind of like the standard higher beat, 28,800 vibrations per hour. So yeah, you'll get definitely more precision and accuracy based on the movement. I mean, it just has you have to admit that the Daytona has a much upgraded movement to something compared to this. This is kind of like much more of just a workhorse basic movement, like more mass produced, whereas this has a lot of features. It has a full balance bridge, it has a lot more anti-magnetism, and it has so it has better shock protection, just a bunch of more features to the movement, and automatic winding, obviously. So the big differences in the movements for sure. Big difference in these examples, this being kind of a slightly vintage, this being quite a modern one. And one of the things I like the best is that this version this watch itself has a tool-free adjustment. It's slight, but and I always get confused by Tim Mosso, because he always says that the easy link is the equivalent of a full link, which it's clearly not. I think the full link must be close to a centimeter apart, whereas this is about 5 millimeters. So it's about a half link difference. So you can get really good sizing, because it basically you pick the fit, and then you could adjust it as within a half link. But it's also mostly best, the best feature of it is that if your wrist is changing in because of because of the weather, because of the humidity, because of activity, whatnot, your hydration level actually, then you won't end up with a watch that's too tight on your wrist, and you won't have to size it too something that's a little too loose. Like with a watch like this, you'll have to keep it a little bit loose, or otherwise you could run into a problem of it being too tight. So that's a big improvement. The lume is much better on the Daytona because it's chromalite. This is Fotina on the hands. I had this serviced recently, and I got my watchmaker to try to match. So I kept the tritium hands obviously, and then I got a new pair of hands, and he re-lumed this to try to match the patina of the dial, which I really like. So rather than just having like stark white hands, that would be the replacement hands. I don't think that looks good when there's a tritium dial and then like stark white hands. And I don't like the hands on these tritium Speedmasters does not age very well. It just kind of turns black and cracks up. So I don't like that look either. So now the lume, it was at the cost of the usability of the lume. So I can't really fault the brightness of the lume on this, because it's more just aesthetic to match the dial rather than be functional. But the chromalite is really quite good. It's not nearly as good as on a Submariner or a, an Explorer 2, like the modern Explorer 2, because there's not as much of it. But the chromalite is really solid lume in terms of like lasting a long time. So this is definitely better in the dark, but in low light this is much more legible. In general, this is much more legible. You can that's pretty good effect, right? If I at certain angles, especially, like you'll easily read this in low light, just because of the stark white of the hands. So this, sometimes you have to kind of catch the light. Like, it's very legible there, but it's not very legible there, especially at a glance. So the Speedmaster definitely wins for legibility. Okay guys, so I'm back. My first video got interrupted by my son coming outside, so that's fine. But anyway, it was probably for the best, because I was starting to ramble on anyway. But I went through a bunch of the similarities and differences and stuff like that. So what I think I'll try to do, just to wrap up the video, is talk about some of the things that would make you maybe pick one instead of the other. So I guess I'll kind of try to focus on some of the things that each one does better than the other. Of course, at the end of the day, it's all going to be a matter of preference for which one you would prefer. But some of them definitely do, like each of them has things that it does have an advantage over the other. So I'll start with the Daytona, I guess, because it's probably got them a lot more advantages, objectively speaking. And I guess the most obvious one would be the number of features. So the movement, it's just got a basically an objectively better movement than the Speedmaster. Being just a higher grade movement, just better constructed, more parts. It's got a full balance bridge. It's got a Brega overcoil. So and this, I should say this, it would have an asterisk, because the new 3861 movement would have a lot of improvements over the classic Speedmaster, but I'm kind of talking about a bit more of the classic Speedmaster, and just the one that's based on the Lemania 1873. So the new one is anti-magnetic, and it's a chronometer. So but if you compare it to the ones like that were made kind of forever with the 861 and the 1861 movements and the variations of that, they're not chronometers. They're not very just sophisticated, I guess you could say. They're not anti-magnetic and stuff like that. So the 4130 that's in the Daytona just has a lot of features. It's automatic. The watch is more water resistant. It's got better accuracy than the Lemania based movements. It has a higher precision. These always come with sapphire crystals, which you can get on the Speedmaster, but it's not the classic. And this has hacking seconds and all that. So again, some of those features are improved on the 3861. So that would be a kind of a different comparison. But so anyway, but this, you might argue, still has more features that a lot of people do prefer, like having it automatic. Is a big one for a lot of people, especially if it's their everyday watch. Now, actually, I love manual wind watches, and it's a positive aspect in its own right for me. I don't even really know why. There's something that I like about manual winds. Oh, and it doesn't have a screw down crown, so if your Speedmaster is stopped because you haven't worn it, you just directly wind it a bit, and you just pull it straight out, set the time. They both don't have dates, which I like a lot too, because it's just that idea of it's just a 12-hour function, so you don't have to worry about AM PM, the date. So it's just very handy to have just a 12-hour watch, and it's even handier if you don't have a screw down crown that you have to deal with, because you can just wind directly. It's in its winding setting when the crown is pushed in, and then it only has one setting. You just pull it out, and then you can set it. Now this doesn't have hacking, and you can see actually it was a couple of days ago that I did the first video. It was probably, I don't know, I guess maybe 40 hours ago or something like that, and I haven't wound either of them. I just picked them, I put them away, and then I picked them up to do this video, and I hadn't wound it. So you can tell the Speedmaster slowed down quite a bit, and then the Daytona's bang on. Now that's not my watchmaker's fault or anything like that. I think it's just that the amplitude went lower as the mainspring was almost out, whereas this is a 72-hour power reserve, and it just is very accurate. So this is like bang on. This is about 1 second off of where it was when I set it to start the video, and you probably could see I wound it up from the start. So that was the only way you can really set this very precisely, the Speedmaster, is if you wait for it to stop and then synchronize it, and just like start it when you start it up. And you can always jump start them by shaking the watch, because the balance will like move and then start going, because there's always some energy in the spring. It doesn't, in the mainspring, it doesn't go all the way down, so you can always jump start them when it gets there. But with a hacking watch, you don't have to worry about that. You can just set it precisely whenever you want, whether it's running or not. So anyway, that's not a big deal, but just something to know. Like, it's not really quite a fair comparison because they have different power reserves, but you can tell that the Speedmaster slowed down by, let's see precisely here, about 10 seconds in 2 days. And that's actually pretty good. That's still within chronometry settings. And my watchmaker, I just got the service, and the watchmaker did an amazing job. It's running at like, I think like +1, but you can tell then it was sitting for almost 2 days, like almost its full power reserve. Then it did lose some time. So that's no big deal, but it's just kind of it just shows you some of the benefits of having like a higher grade movement with a longer power reserve. Again, the new 3861 does solve some of those issues to some extent too. So what else? So the Daytona is a more comfortable watch. It's a better size, it's slimmer, and the bracelet is a lot nicer, especially than this one. But I've had other Speedmasters as well, and that's just like pretty much universal. The Daytona wears better, it's more comfortable on the wrist, which are slightly two different things. But it's a better size, and it's just better comfort. It's just like, there's actually really something about the Daytona. I mean, I'm not saying it's completely night and day, but it's actually so comfortable when you put it on. It's just so silky on the wrist, more than other Rolexes that I've had. So it's better than the GMTs and Submariners. I think, I don't know exactly what it is, but the shape of the case is part of it. And the Yachtmaster ones have a very similar type of case to this too. So it's just like one of the most comfortable sports watches I've ever tried, for sure. And especially compared to an older one like this bracelet pulls hair, and it's just not quite as comfortable on the wrist. And the Speedmaster is thicker. It's not a great deal thicker, but it does actually make a difference. And so the wearability and the comfort is definitely better on the Daytona. Just a more comfortable watch to wear and live with. And the Daytona is also, I think, more versatile in the sense that some people might think it's not as versatile because it's quite flashy with the polished center links and the polished bezel, but to be honest, it is very casual, if you like, depending on how you dress. Whereas like, but it's also dressy, and you know, it works well with kind of smarter, whatever you want to call it, like dressing up a bit. The Daytona does better. Obviously, they're both steel sports watches, so they're never going to be dress watches. But there's just something about the style of the Daytona that does make it more versatile, because it is very casual if you want it, depending on how you dress, and it's also you can dress it up. Whereas the Speedmaster, no one, like, there's nothing wrong with wearing a Speedmaster with like anything. You could wear it with a tuxedo if you want, because that's just the kind of the times we live in. But it's always going to be like a very tool looking watch, very basic looking watch. So it's definitely, you can dress down. It's not as natural to dress it up. So that's not a big deal. It's not like anybody really has to worry about that. But I do think versatility in a design is important. Like I have a Zin EZM, a Zin U50, which is like extremely tool like, and it just would look out of place if you tried to dress it up. Even if you were going out to dinner, or if you were going to a wedding or something like that, it's just not up to it, if you care about that at all. Whereas, the Speedmaster might pull it off a little bit, especially because it has it's so classic and it's just so well known that it does work. But at the same time, just the aesthetic is very, very tool-like. So, and I guess part of that would be the bezel too. The black bezel makes it look larger, even though these are quite close. There's about 1 millimeter difference between the diameter of the bezels, but you can see actually the black bezel kind of extends how the watch comes off, just extends the dial almost. So it does make it look larger, even than it is. Plus the width of this bezel, this has a smaller dial, even though they're very close in size. So this just comes off as a smaller, more elegant size, but it also works very well for casual. Like, so yeah, and then there's, of course, you could talk about like brand prestige and price and stuff like that, but that's not something I really would ever characterize as like a pro or a con necessarily. That's like more purely preference. So, whether you like Rolex more or you like Omega more, I know a lot of people have things against Rolex, and that's understandable. And some people prefer Omega just because they think it's a more kind of like honest to goodness, or it's just more fun. I can totally appreciate that. Like, Rolex is very, very conservative, and a lot of Omega products just take more chances and do arguably more interesting things. Whereas I think Rolex kind of leaves that up to Tudor. So that's kind of very much preference too. So there's more to say probably, but I'm going to try to keep it a bit short, but I never do that. So anyway, that's just the way I am. So the Speedy definitely has a history edge, just because it was used, for actual like NASA missions of all sorts of all types, and actually kind of has bragging rights over the Rolex chronographs, in that when they were originally testing for what would become the Moonwatch, or just the I guess they call it like manned space missions or whatever, they did have a Rolex chronograph. I don't know if it was a Daytona or it was a pre-Daytona or what, but this did beat out the Rolex chronograph for testing. Now, I should mention this would definitely pass all the tests now. Like, this is more waterproof. It's probably more shock resistant, and it just has a better movement. So, but actually they did specify that they wanted a manual wind, which interesting, because people kind of have the misconception that automatic watch wouldn't work in space, but that's not actually true, because if you were to go like this, it might not work, because the gravity pulls would pull the rotor down into the always the bottom position, and that would wind it. But if you're moving it around, whether you're in a gravitational field or not, it'll still move around just because of inertia and acceleration and all that. So, but anyway, that aside, this definitely has the historical edge and just the bragging rights over it. I mean, I think some people even would make fun of the Daytona, because the only reason they even have the prestige of the Daytona, 24 Hours of Daytona, all that, is just because they sponsored it in the first place. So it was never really chosen by anybody. Now, I'm sure you could probably question how dubious the relationship between Omega and NASA is anyway, because I think there's definitely some marketing involved in that also. But I think there's definitely a clearer link to, like, authentic history with the Speedmaster, and I think that's going to be one of the biggest things that people would favor the Speedmaster for. Just because it has that, it has those kind of roots that are kind of like unflappable. So another thing that people would prefer the Speedmaster for is probably the price. So this version is slightly kind of, I guess, more like uncommon, and a little bit harder to find. So this exact watch is like slightly higher than some of the other like more basic Speedmaster Professionals that you could find. But even still, the Daytona is probably worth 4 or 5 times as much as this watch. So that's just the facts of the market, how it is now. And some of it makes sense, some of it doesn't. You could definitely say this is better value for money, but at the same time, you could also say the Rolex, because the market value is so much higher than the retail price, that it's much better value for money, depending on how much you paid for it and what happens in the future. Nobody knows what will happen in the future. It's almost certain that this will continue to go up in value more than this one, partly because there are just so few versions of the Daytona, which is another aspect that the Speedmaster has the advantage over, because there's so many different types. There's so many different eras to it. There's so many different dial variations and just specifications that you can get on a Speedmaster, whereas there are only ever a few Daytonas at a time. Of course, there are a lot of different combinations of metals and dials and stuff like that on the Daytonas, but the Speedmaster just has like limitless options. There are always different special editions. There are always there's sapphire sandwiches, there are Hesalite sandwiches like this. There's just the normal, the actual authentic Speedmaster Professional that's actually used at NASA, and there are different versions of that because based on what years you're talking about. So there are definitely just more versions. There's the vintage ones, which are actually still accessible. There's right up to the modern ones and the 3861s. They're automatic versions. There's, like I said, the ones that NASA has actually used. There's, like I've said, there's ones with moon phases and all sorts of stuff. So it's pretty cool. There's definitely way more variation in the Speedmaster family, and there's something for everybody. And again, there's that version that will, there are several different versions of actual authentic ones that were really used. So that's pretty cool for the Speedmaster. And I think more people would actually argue that, not just because of price, but the Speedmaster is kind of a must-have for almost any collection of sports watches above the Daytona. The Daytona, I know it's like more, it can be harder to get, and people think it's very overpriced, and even besides all that, I think a lot of people agree that Speedmaster is kind of a must for a sports collection. So I think all of that makes it really cool. It's also like really worry free, because of the number that are of Speedmasters that are out there. I mean, finding parts will never be a problem. It won't be a problem to find parts for the Daytona, but it'll be expensive. It won't be a problem to find somebody who can service the Daytona, but your options are not like a Speedmaster. And it's kind of, it'll be a question of who you're comfortable handing it over to. I think you'd probably be more careful with your Daytona, whereas any reputable watchmaker could deal with a Le Mans movement. I mean, they're kind of universal, and they're used by so many brands, and it is a really great movement. So it's just kind of worry free in a lot of ways. You can replace it. You can find exactly the one you want, whereas it's harder to find ones, especially locally, for Daytonas. I got really lucky because I actually found one in my province, but I've not seen one before or after really that I could get my hands on if I wanted to. So you can find any Speedmaster you want, and you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about damaging it, like I say, because it won't be expensive to repair. If even if you do, you could. I mean, the crystals are like, they used to be really cheap. I think Omega actually charges over $100 now, but they probably used to be like $30. they're probably kicking around all over the place. So it's just a worry-free watch. It's just a great sports watch. It's not as waterproof, but at the same time, it is waterproof more than people kind of assume. Like, you can definitely swim with it, and you can do stuff like that. I wouldn't do that, just because you could push the crowns. And actually, one thing I should mention, another thing that people would like about the Speedmaster is that it's this easy to start the chronograph, whereas almost everybody keeps them screwed in on the Daytona, and a lot of people say, well, that's like completely defeats the purpose of having a chronograph if you wanted to actually use it in real life and not have to like take it off and unscrew it. Now I do agree with that to some extent, but the truth is, you can, if you are somebody who routinely uses it or is planning to use it or think there's even a chance that you're going to use it, you can just leave the crowns unscrewed, the pushers, I should say, because it's also a myth that that's for water resistance. It's not for water resistance. This has 100 meters of water resistance, whether they're screwed in or not. It's actually just a safety feature. It's almost just an aesthetic feature at this point too, because on the older ones, the plastic crystal, the 4-digit Daytonas, they had that look because I think they did have screw-in crowns for water resistance at that time. I'm not an expert about that, but it's just become the look now to have like screwable pushers. It would just look a bit strange because they've had the screw-down pushers for a few generations now. But it's just a safety feature for basically two things, so that if you are using the chronograph, you could screw it in so that you wouldn't stop it accidentally by hitting it on something, and also if you were swimming with it, it's just a safety feature so that you don't push the buttons in while you're underwater, because that could cause a problem. But it's not because they have to be screwed in for water resistance. So that's something to note. It's just kind of like a bit of trivia anyway, because it doesn't really matter. I don't think that many people are doing serious swimming with their Daytonas. Not anybody I know anyway. But you could argue that that it is more useful to just not even have to worry about the screwing of the pushers at all, because you can just instantly use this no matter what. So it isn't as water resistant, and you do run the risk if you were swimming that you could push it in while you're swimming and get some water in there. But anyway, that's just a little note on the chronograph difference. So that's pretty much most of the things I can think of about why you might prefer one over the other. So let me know if you have any thoughts or you have any preferences and what you think. I won't really like declare a winner necessarily, because I really do think it will be down to preference, and there are enough points about each that would kind of justify it being a winner to different people. Like, it's not just small things that they have over each other. They're major advantages they have over each other. So they're definitely justified to pick one over the other. So yeah, those are kind of my thoughts. There's definitely more to say, but I've already made like a 40-minute video. So thanks guys for watching all these. I know I always ramble on, but it's kind of just my style, because I don't script them and I don't edit them. I just do one takes all the time, except for like this when this will be my first time actually editing a video by putting two together. But anyway, yeah, thanks for watching. I'm always happy to answer questions or hear your thoughts about these watches, because it's just for fun, and yeah, that's what it's all about. So thanks for watching, and subscribe and like and share if you want, if you think anybody would if you know anybody who would like these too. Okay, thanks, bye.